The Philippine Sea stretched out in endless blue, an oceanic plain of wind and sunlight framed by distant islands and the promise of decisive battle. It was June 1944, and beneath that calm surface, two vast armadas converged. To the west steamed the Imperial Japanese Navy under Vice Admiral Ozawa. To the east advanced the United States Fifth Fleet under Admiral Raymond Spruance, with Task Force 58, America's carrier strike arm, commanded by the aviator Mark A. Mitscher. The clash that loomed would mark the death of Japan's naval heir. Power and seal control of the Pacific sky, Ozawa, carried orders of desperation. The Marianas had been invaded, and with them hung the fate of Japan's empire. The islands of Saipan, Guam, and Tinian guarded the sea routes to the homeland. If they fell, American B-29 bombers would soon strike Tokyo itself. Ozawa's mission was clear: find the enemy carriers and annihilate them. His fleet numbered around 90 ships, 9 carriers, 5 battleships, and a host of cruisers, destroyers, and oilers. They carried roughly 450 carrier aircraft and expected support from another 300 planes stationed on island airfields. To the east, Mitscher's task force dwarfed it: 15 carriers, 7 fast battleships, and hundreds of escorts, nearly 130 ships in all. His carrier decks held close to 1,000 aircraft. The numerical advantage was crushing, though the Japanese still hoped to offset it through strategy and range. Ozawa intended to fight by deception. He divided his force into 2 main bodies: a vanguard of smaller carriers and battleships meant to act as bait, and a powerful main group that would remain behind. His plan was to lure Mitscher's planes toward the decoy, then strike the Americans from long range using carrier and land-based aircraft combined. Japanese carrier planes still enjoyed greater range than their American counterparts, and Ozawa counted on that to deliver the first and perhaps decisive blow. But what he could not know was that his trap was already broken before the battle even began. Days earlier, Mitscher's Hellcats, Avengers, and dive bombers had swept across the Marianas in wave after wave, striking Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. Airfields were cratered, hangars shredded, and aircraft destroyed by the hundreds. The island-based squadrons Ozawa expected to join him were gone. The decisive blow he planned to deliver would instead fall upon his own fleet. The two commanders could not have been more different. Ozawa was courteous, disciplined, and loyal to a failing empire. Mitscher was quiet, almost taciturn with the calm intensity of a career flyer. On the bridge of his flagship Lexington, he was rarely seen without his cap pulled low, his gaze fixed on the flight deck where his pilots launched into the Pacific wind. Both men had built their lives around the carrier age, but only one commanded a fleet ready for the modern war that now unfolded. The seeds of this confrontation had been sown years earlier. After Pearl Harbor, the United States had rebuilt its shattered fleet around aircraft carriers rather than battleships. The carriers had carried vengeance to the Coral Sea, to Midway, and across the Solomons. At Midway, 2 years before, Spruance had commanded carriers Enterprise and Hornet, despite his background as a surface officer. That battle's outcome, the sinking of 4 Japanese carriers, had broken the back of Japan's elite air groups. What remained by 1944 were hastily trained replacements, brave but inexperienced, flying aircraft that no longer matched the rugged Grumman Hellcats they would soon face. By early June 1944, the American push through the Central Pacific had reached the Marianas. The capture of those islands would place Japan within range of B-29 bombers, threatening the homeland directly. Tokyo could not allow it. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, the combined fleet's new commander, saw only one option: commit everything. The rise and fall of the empire, he signaled, depends on this one battle. Ozawa's fleet sailed from the western Philippines on June 15th, refueled at sea, and headed east into the Philippine Sea. On paper, it was still formidable. 3 large carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, 2 medium carriers, and 4 light carriers. The battleships Yamato and Musashi, largest in the world, steamed beside them. Yet beneath the steel decks and proud names lay weakness. Their planes lacked the new radar and proximity fuses carried by American ships. Their crews had only a fraction of the training of their enemies. The Imperial Navy that had once ruled the Pacific was fighting as a ghost of its former self. Spruance and Mitscher knew the Japanese would come. Submarines, Flying Fish, and Seahorse sighted Ozawa's fleet west of the Marianas on June 15th, and Spruance reacted immediately. His orders from Nimitz were to protect the invasion forces on Saipan at all costs. The main fleet maneuvered west to meet the threat, with Mitscher's carriers forming a massive arc. 5 carrier task groups stretched across more than 60 miles of sea. Each group formed a defensive ring, carriers at the center, surrounded by cruisers and destroyers bristling with anti-aircraft guns. Ahead of them steamed Admiral Willis Lee's battle group. 7 fast battleships ready to turn their 16-inch guns on any Japanese surface attack. On June 18th, Japanese scout planes spotted the Americans. Ozawa's subordinates urged an immediate strike, but he held back. He wanted to coordinate all his groups for a grand assault the next day. "Let us do it properly tomorrow," he signaled. That delay would cost him everything. Dawn broke on June 19, 1944, under a perfect blue sky. The sun's first light touched the decks of Mitscher's carriers as flight crews readied planes and pilots climbed into their cockpits. Far to the west, Ozawa's ships also came alive. Scouts lifted off into the morning air to locate the enemy, while below-deck armorers loaded torpedoes and bombs. The largest carrier battle in history was about to begin. American radar operators were the first to detect movement, blips on their screens 300 miles out, faint but certain. At 10 a.m., the alarms echoed through Task Force 58, enemy aircraft inbound. Mitscher's reaction was immediate. "Turn into the wind," he ordered. Every carrier shifted course to launch fighters. Deck crews worked with machine-like speed, catapulting Grumman F-6F Hellcats into the sky. Above them, squadrons began to form a vast umbrella of combat air patrols, layer upon layer. The Japanese attack came in waves, 4 in all, each launched from hundreds of miles away. The first wave, 71 aircraft strong, appeared as tiny glints in the western sky. Hellcats from the carrier Belleau Wood met them 70 miles out. What followed was chaos and slaughter. The Japanese pilots, brave but inexperienced, met veteran Americans flying tougher, faster aircraft. The Hellcats cut through them with relentless precision. In minutes, 24 enemy planes were burning in the air or falling into the sea. Others scattered, only to be hunted down by more interceptors. A few reached the fleet and attacked picket destroyers, causing minor damage. One bomb hit the battleship South Dakota, killing and wounding 50 men, but she remained in formation. The price for that single hit was nearly the entire first wave. The second Japanese strike, 107 aircraft, appeared on radar shortly before 11. Again, Mitscher's fighters rose to meet them, guided by radar vectors from shipboard controllers. The Americans intercepted at 60 miles out and ripped the formation apart. 70 attackers were destroyed before they even sighted the fleet. Those that survived pressed on, diving through anti-aircraft fire toward the carriers. Bombs splashed harmlessly wide. Torpedoes missed. 97 of the 107 never returned. A third attack of 47 planes came at midday. Hellcats intercepted them 50 miles from the task force. 7 fell immediately, and most of the rest fled or were shot down before reaching range. A fourth, scattered group arrived later, lost and disorganized, some never finding their targets. By mid-afternoon, the sky over the Philippine Sea belonged entirely to the Americans. From the decks below, sailors watched burning aircraft fall like comets into the ocean. Smoke streaked the horizon. The smell of fuel and cordite hung in the air. "Hell, this is like an old-time turkey shoot," said Commander Paul Buey of the Lexington. The phrase spread through the fleet, and by nightfall, the battle had earned its immortal name, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. That day, Japan lost 346 carrier aircraft. The Americans lost 15. For every Hellcat that fell, more than 20 enemy planes went down. The imbalance of skill, technology, and coordination had become absolute. Among the day's aces was Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell of the Essex, who shot down 5 Japanese bombers that morning and would become the Navy's top ace with 34 kills. Others matched him. Lieutenant Alex Vrasiu destroyed 6 bombers in 8 minutes. Ensign Spiderweb downed another 6. Their skill was lethal efficiency, honed by years of training and combat experience their opponents no longer possessed. Yet even as the sky cleared, another kind of battle raged below the waves. American submarines patrolling ahead of the fleet had sighted the Japanese carriers. At 8 a.m., USS Albacore fired a spread of torpedoes at the massive Taiho Ozawa's flagship. One struck home, rupturing aviation fuel tanks deep within her hull. The explosion seemed minor at first, but gasoline vapors began leaking through the ship. Hours later, a spark from a generator ignited the fumes. Taiho vanished in a roar of flame, taking 1,650 men with her. Ozawa barely escaped to another carrier, Zuikaku, to continue the fight. Meanwhile, the submarine Kavala found the veteran carrier Shokaku and fired 3 torpedoes. They struck amidships, igniting her fuel stores and bomb magazines. The carrier erupted in a towering explosion and rolled over, carrying nearly 1,300 souls to the bottom. By sunset, 2 of Japan's finest carriers were gone. Hundreds of aircraft littered the sea, their pilots dead or drifting. Ozawa's proud mobile fleet had been cut to pieces, and the Americans, almost untouched, still had an entire day of battle ahead. As darkness settled across the Philippine Sea, the Japanese fleet limped westward. Flames still burned from the dying Taiho, and oil slicks spread in the wake of the sunken Shokaku. Vice Admiral Ozawa believed the day had gone well. Faulty. Reports told him that his pilots had destroyed multiple American carriers and inflicted severe damage. Many of his missing aircraft, he thought, had simply landed on the Marianas. In reality, his air arm had been annihilated. Of more than 370 planes launched, fewer than 100 returned. Admiral Mitscher, aboard the Lexington, knew differently. The day's radar logs and pilot reports told him the Japanese had suffered catastrophic losses. Still, he wanted to finish the job. Spruance, ever cautious, ordered Task Force 58 to maintain position to guard the Saipan invasion. Mitscher waited, knowing the next day might bring a final opportunity to destroy Japan's carrier force completely. June 20th dawned hot and still. A pale haze hung over the ocean as American search planes fanned out from the carriers. Hours passed with no contact. The Japanese fleet, retreating northwest, was beyond range. The men aboard Task Force 58 grew restless. Fuel lines were checked, aircraft rearmed, pilots briefed, then told to stand down. Late in the afternoon, a lone scout plane from the Enterprise spotted ships on the horizon, specks moving across the endless blue, 275 miles distant. It was Ozawa's force. The distance was at the extreme limit of the American aircraft's reach. Mitscher calculated the risks. The strike would have to launch immediately, fly for hours to reach the target, attack near dusk, and then somehow return in darkness. Most of his pilots had never landed at night, but the chance might not come again. At 4:20 p.m., Mitscher gave the order. Launch all planes. From 15 carriers, 226 aircraft roared into the evening sky, Hellcats, Avengers, Dauntlesses, and Helldivers, waves of wings glittering in the sunset. Deck crews worked in silence, aware that many of those they launched might never return. Fuel limits were tight. Navigational errors or battle damage could mean ditching in the dark. Yet the pilots went willingly, understanding they carried the weight of the Pacific on their shoulders. As the Americans approached, Ozawa's lookouts sighted them low over the sea. Only 75 Japanese fighters rose to meet the attack. The defenders were outnumbered 3-1. The Hellcats cut through them like scythes, clearing the path for the bombers. The first targets were the fleet's vulnerable oilers. Explosions blossomed across the waves as burning fuel poured into the sea. Then the bombers turned on the carriers. The Hio took 2 torpedo hits and burst into flames, aviation fuel pouring through shattered bulkheads. Her captain ordered the crew to abandon ship as secondary explosions ripped her apart. Nearby, the Zuikaku, one of the last survivors of Pearl Harbor, took bomb hits on her flight deck, while the light carriers Chiyoda and Junyo were also struck and set ablaze. The battleship Haruna and cruiser Maya suffered heavy damage. The Japanese formation disintegrated, scattering into the darkness. When the American planes turned for home, the sun was already sinking. The horizon glowed red with fire and then faded into black. Pilots checked their instruments and realized they had flown far beyond safety margins. Radios crackled with low fuel warnings and distress calls. Some began ditching into the sea before they could even sight the fleet. On the Lexington's bridge, Mitscher faced an impossible decision. Naval doctrine demanded blackout at night to avoid submarine attack. But hundreds of his pilots were out there, low on fuel, searching for their carriers in the dark. At 8:45 p.m., he gave an unprecedented order. Turn on the lights. Every carrier and destroyer in Task Force 58 illuminated itself, deck lights blazing, searchlights sweeping the horizon, signal lamps flashing in sequence. It was a beacon in the night, visible for miles, a risk that could have invited enemy submarines. But Mitscher decided that saving his men outweighed the danger. Pilots described the sight as breathtaking, tiny constellations glowing on the water. They flew toward it, exhausted and grateful. Some landed with tanks dry, others crashed into the sea within sight of the ships. 60 planes were lost that night, but the majority of their crews survived, plucked from the water by rescue destroyers through the night and into dawn. Lieutenant Commander Robert Winston later said, "We stood open-mouthed at the sheer audacity of asking the Japs to come and get us. Our pilots were not expendable." By morning, the battle was over. Ozawa's once proud mobile fleet had been destroyed as a fighting force. 3 carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Hio, lay on the bottom. 2 oilers were gone, and 6 other ships were damaged. Nearly 3,000 Japanese sailors and airmen were dead. The Americans lost just over 100 aircraft and fewer than 100 men. As Task Force 58 turned eastward to refuel, Admiral Spruance reported to Nimitz in Pearl Harbor, "The enemy fleet has been badly hurt and is retiring westward." Nimitz replied simply, "Well done." In Japan, the defeat was catastrophic. Ozawa radioed his report in code. "The battle situation is extremely unfavorable. The Imperial Navy never recovered. With the loss of its remaining carriers and trained pilots, Japan's ability to wage offensive naval war was finished." The decisive battle doctrine that had guided its strategy for 2 decades ended in ruin. The Americans called it the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Sailors who fought it preferred another name, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a grim shorthand for a lopsided battle that shattered the last illusion of Japanese air superiority. The victory secured the Marianas for the United States, ensuring the success of the Saipan landings and paving the way for the next stage of the Pacific War, the approach to the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and eventually Japan itself. Above all, it confirmed that the aircraft carrier, not the battleship, was now the true ruler of the seas. When the smoke cleared, Admiral Mark Mitscher stood quietly on his bridge, the night wind rippling his cap. Around him, the ocean was calm once more. The men below deck cheered, sang, and wept. But Mitscher, ever reserved, said little. He knew that what had begun years earlier at Coral Sea and Midway had now reached its inevitable conclusion. The Imperial Navy was broken, and the path to victory lay open.